Okay, Cosmic Baddies, quick pause. If you are so ready to call in your next chapter, you need to get into my workshop, How to Make a Vision Board That Actually Works. This is not your typical Pinterest collage situation. I'm teaching you the exact method I have used to manifest some of the biggest things in my life, like 2 babies in 1 year, our Soho apartment, our Montauk beach house, and yes, even my dream book deal with Penguin Random House. In this workshop, I blend astrology, neuroscience, and intuitive magic to help you create a vision board that actually manifests. You get the recordings, the templates, the workbook, the joy, the giggles, all of it. So if you're ready to design your destiny, head to CosmicRx.com/highervision and grab your spot. That's CosmicRx.com/highervision. Your future self is waiting.
I pitched this book a long time ago, maybe in 2022. That's when I started pitching Written in the Stars. And I had gotten a book deal with another publication, but I didn't really like the terms, so I declined it. And I was like, I'm going to go for it. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to go for it. So it was in a hiatus during a moment. And I had an Akashic Records reading. That's when I was training to be an Akashic channel. And I think that has been the most incredible reading of my life. Not that I had given up on the book, but I had other fish to fry at the time. So the first thing she said, my teacher's like, do you have like a book? What's going on with that? And I was like, oh, yeah. And she said, no, this book needs to happen. Like the first thing that my guides that she heard from me, because that's what you're doing in an Akashic reading. It's your soul who's speaking. This book needs to happen, but you need to make it more about you.
Welcome to Cosmic RX Radio, a podcast that gives you real-life tools of spiritual empowerment and pure hype. I'm your host and intuitive guide, Maddie Murphy. I'll be serving up your weekly energy readings, cosmic boss interviews, and astro inspiration. Are you ready to love yourself more, manifest your dream life, and own your magic? Let's jump in. Hello, my baddies. Okay, today you are definitely going to want to have pen and paper by your side and possibly an internet browser open because we are about to go to Celestial School. We have one of, I know, a fan favorite astrologer, Narayana Montúfar, on the podcast. She is been on before to promote her first book about moon science. She is a world-renowned astrologer, writer, Akashic Records practitioner, visual artist, and the author of, as I mentioned, Moon Science, Unlock Your Inner Luminary Power, that I know a lot of you bought, read, and shared after she came on the podcast last time. And now we're going to be talking about her newest book, baby, Written in Your Stars, Use Your Saturn Return, Pluto Square, and Other Planetary Cycles to Become Your Best Self today. Narayana really thrives on maintaining a sacred and intimate connection with the sky through her writing, private readings, and abstract painting. She is an artist in all senses of the word, and she really believes in the power of the universe is best harnessed when we try to access it within ourselves, and we really speak so much of the same astro language. So I'm so excited to have her on the pod today and talk about this delicious, practical, and beautiful new book. Welcome to Cosmic RX Radio, Narayana. How are we doing today?
I am so excited to be here with you and so grateful to be here for the third time. I think the last
Oh my God, the third time. We did 3. You're so right. I was thinking about your book, but we did a whole one about like the astrology. Oh my gosh. I know. That's why I feel like we just like know each other so well and we're besties. And leading up to this podcast, I just kept thinking about your other book because it's on my bookshelf. But you're right. This is our third little like astro date here to chit chat.
Yes. I think I got to revisit. In fact, that's on my long to-do list of revisiting our latest podcast, which was Pluto in Aquarius. And some of the things that we talked about are starting to manifest. So that's the most exciting part, right? Because our brain loves validation. I think I need to go back and make some reels about it because everything's coming out now.
I think we should with the timestamp because we're like, we mentioned this. And, I think part of Pluto and Aquarius is this really, there's so many like highs and lows, and then we'll talk about it in your book. But I love that we just always acknowledge the shadow and the light of any, planet and any planetary transit. But I feel like there's so many like intense parts of Pluto and Aquarius that feel a little stickier. And there's so many beautiful and expansive, gorgeous things coming out of the transit. But one of them is just very meta, like we talked about, just astrology being even more in the mainstream. And I feel like it's just so meta that I'm like, I feel like for the first time, probably in the biggest way on the planet right now, people having access to astrology because of, that we have calculators like the gorgeous one we're going to talk about on your website. We don't have to hand draw charts. There's AI helping us understand astrology. There's so many like great websites and Instagrams and TikToks and books that I'm like, wow, it's kind of meta that we're in Pluto and Aquarius where we're all moving towards a higher mind, a way of looking at things. And for the first time ever, like, I keep thinking about like, can we use this collective mind, this collective higher mind of Pluto and Aquarius to sort of shape us using this big transit in like the more highest consciousness way, right? Because we have the awareness of it, which is so much of what your book is about, of like having the awareness as we go into a cycle.
Of course. And also, well, maybe this is not the place to talk about it, but for example, I remember we talked about mind-blowing discoveries. And they're happening all the time. They're discovering these ancient tablets and like underground cities. And like, it's going to be proven pretty soon that humanity has a deeper story. And I think since Aquarian energy, we think about it as the future only sometimes, but in reality, it's like a time traveling.
Oh, I love that.
Energy, like we're moving into the future, but we're also discovering the past. Right?
I love that. It's so Aquarian, like in that alien sense of like alien and ancient wisdom. It's all, and it makes you even question time. Again, we'll get into your book in a second, but I did just see like Popular Mechanics released a really data-backed, like scientific paper on how our intuition is us getting information from the future, like by nanoseconds, by seconds. And, I didn't read the whole thing, so I can't quote it, but I just saw headlines like that every day where I'm like, okay, we're starting to tap in and understand that there's a little bit more to our daily life, to ourself, to our consciousness than just, maybe what has met the eye in the past. So I guess with that, let's talk about your book, because we should have a separate podcast just doing like a recap of where we're at with Pluto and Aquarius. And maybe we could talk about like Uranus and Gemini too.
Ooh, yes, I'm very excited about that. Actually, I know that most people aren't, but I think there's a lot of possibility there.
I think you and I, and why I love having you on, I do think you and I, while we're very different, we have different backgrounds, of course, I do think you and I we look at astrology a lot as like the opportunity there, right? And that there's always opportunity in a transit, in something, a cycle, whether it's personal, like we talk about in your book, or planetary and the collective. And then we have to acknowledge the shadowy and the tricky and sticky stuff, absolutely. But there's always a chance to kind of alchemize that and turn lead into gold, or see our chart as a gift in, again, the collective or in the personal level. So I'm excited to talk about, as I was reading your book, I was like, yeah, we really, even transits that sound scarier, Pluto Square, Saturn Return, reading about it in your book, I'm like, yes, this is very similar to my approach to this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, and anyone watching on YouTube will see, tell us about this gorgeous book that I know that you not only wrote, but also art directed. Tell us a little bit about this, written in your stars.
This book is really special to me because, I mean, I in reality, I never thought I would become an author. Writing and all of that is something that I really had to learn throughout the years because my first language is Spanish. I always liked writing. I wrote a lot in French back in my earlier years, but I never really thought I would. And moon signs just fell on my lap in reality. It just happened in that crazy year, 2020. And I think it was one of the best years of my life to date. And, but then I really loved that process of like giving birth to a book that would be accessible to almost way more than a painting or some expensive piece of art, right?
Mm.
I love that that would be available to most people, that it would be accessible for people to wake up or to feel supported and validated in their journey. I love that process. And so I really, really wanted to create a book that I wanted to have when I started studying astrology.
Oh,
I felt like
yes.
there was nothing out there there are incredible books, don't get me wrong, and I have plenty of them here. I'm looking at them, and
Same.
I'm sure you too, right? Because in my opinion, that's the way to study astrology. That's the right way to study astrology.
Yes.
Whether you're becoming an astrologer or you're working with your chart or you're understanding your family, whichever road you want to take with astrology. But I never really found a book that would encompass that motion of the planets.
Mm.
For example, the Saturn, right? Which is the most well-known,
The famous,
the famous,
the star,
the infamous Saturn
the
return.
infamous. Yeah.
Infamous and notorious Saturn return.
Oh my God, I love that.
Which in reality is an incredible part of your Saturn story. It's not just 1 or 2 years. And with this book, I inspire people to think about numbers and time, right? For example, the Saturn cycle moves through 7 years, right? The 7-year itch, and how every 7 years you get a visitation from Saturn, and it's time to buckle up and it's time to show up for your dreams. This is not about your life being this and that,
Mm-mm.
It's about building something meaningful, but your Saturn return is a manifestation of your relationship with Saturn that you've been visiting every 7 years of your life.
Mm. Oh, I love that way of putting
That
it.
was my
Yes.
inspiration to bring people this big picture. I guess all my Sagittarian planets were like, let's put this in a big context.
Yes. And the Sagittarian energy of like, what are these stories? I love like reading this book. It really is like understanding these different stories that are happening. And I always think about Sagittarian energy as like the storyteller, right? Like, let's look at this story that's unfolding so we can understand what's coming next, make more sense of what already happened to us, contextualize that, metabolize that, and then see, oh, how can that inform that, that's probably going to come up in some kind of way again, the next evolution of the story. Now, what do I know? Right. And so I actually love that you have that heavy Sagittarian energy, because this book feels very big picture, but also grounding, where it's not just like, oh, I am a Gemini with a Scorpio moon. It's like there's all of these really cool, multiple different series and stories within us. And you even open up the book with one of my favorite analogies for understanding the chart of, the movie script and the characters. Because I think that helps people whenever I talk to like real astro newbies or like muggles, it really helps, again, go into understanding the chart more. And that it's not just this one static thing of defining who you are. But I feel like for me, our birth chart and the planets, it's like understanding the story of our soul and why we're here. And it's a story that's two ways too, right? Like I think you and I have a similar way of, we almost work with the planets as these sort of guides that are speaking to our archetypal energies that are, it's not just like, oh, Saturn's punishing us. It's like, yes, what's our relationship with Saturn? What are we learning about ourselves through that? What are the things when we're going through a Saturn cycle is every 7 years? Oh, what's that? Oh, that theme keeps coming up again. Maybe I should pay attention and try to have a little bit of a dialogue with that.
And seeing the planets as your parts of yourself, right? Not as external entities, which they are external entities. They're living and breathing, but there's something about those planets that are connecting to revive a part of ourselves. And look, I'm not saying that Saturn transits are easy, and I'm not saying that the Saturn returns are easy. They are really meaningful times, but there's a deeper story other than just hardship and contraction happens. But there is a purpose for that you can only understand if you are not only going towards the future, like when is this going to end, but going towards the past, right? Like that happened to me. And actually, I'm a writer in some publications, and I got assigned an essay about my Saturn return. And since I'm 45, I'm like in between. I'm experiencing my Saturn opposition right now. Since I'm 45, I was able to go back to memory lane to remind myself what happened. And I realized that that Saturn return was a strong, it created a really strong foundation for my life, which I'm still building up on. Like 15 years later, you know?
I feel the exact same way, 100%. Mine was a wake-up call because I had not a lot of Saturn influence in my life, healthy before that, but I'm so grateful that it did give me a foundation because everything I'm doing now exactly built off of that.
For sure. And for example, for me, and I'm in this essay, which is titled, My Saturn Return Was More Than Adulting. It was about starting a new life and leaving a broken marriage. Because that's what it was. You know, a lot of people get married or have babies during their Saturn return. I got divorced. It was the complete opposite. But it was then when I started building up my career in media, which is when I started writing and I started creating content. And like up to now, at my Saturn opposition, this comes out, this book.
Wow. Okay. I love that. And what's
It's
your
like a
Saturn
thread,
sign
right?
in?
It's
Yeah,
like
the
a thread,
thread.
you know, like, and so that's what I really wanted to, that's kind of the experience. And of course, I don't expect everyone to have the same experience similar to mine. But what I'm trying to help people is to open their mind of the possibility of self-study and to like time travel. It's not just about the future. It's about going back and understanding how you responded to certain activations so you can respond to the future activations of that same planet from a conscious place and co-creating with that archetype.
Absolutely. I love that. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking about similar to you, I'm about to turn 41. So, a little bit, past obviously my Saturn return and I'm going through my own sort of midlife as transits, which we'll talk about. But yeah, I was on that conveyor belt and it felt literally like a pull bigger than me where I was just like, I'm not a very conventional person. But around that time, I just felt that pressure. Like, my boyfriend, who I was like long distance with, proposed out of nowhere. And I was like, oh, I guess I should get married because everyone else is doing that. I guess I should do this. And I ended up calling off my wedding, which was one of the hardest but best decisions. Like that's like when my real life story began, where I was like, okay, off of the conveyor belt of life into like, oh, this is who I really am. And, I knew astrology, but very loosely at that time, obviously. And it wasn't until about 2-3 years later, I got a reading and it was literally like 2 weeks before my exact Saturn return. And I was like, if astrology isn't real, and it really helped me understand like, oh, okay, and now I see how that changed the whole course of my life in the best, most empowering way. But at the time, I didn't know I was going through that. So I just felt like I had messed up my whole entire life. And I think it's one of the biggest gifts is to be like what you said, like, okay, how do we work with this energy for our highest consciousness? And in a way that just feels like, okay, I understand this thread that's weaving through. I understand that things are really challenging right now, but with the right like self-study, maybe this is happening so I can step into the evolution that I'm ready for or the next level of my soul's potential or just get closer to my truth, right? So, okay, actually, I'm so curious because we're going to get into other things generally about the book, but you mentioned 2020 was one of the best years of your life. And that's when you wrote, the book that we talked about last time, your moon signs book. What were does that tie into a cycle of yours that you want to highlight?
Well, it's a little bit more tied into transits actually, because you probably use this technique a lot, but I love secondary progressions.
Oh,
That's like the boring name, but I call it like the evolution of the you, right? Which is written in your stars.
That's sexy. That's sexy. I'm gonna use that. I'll give you credit. I like that. Definitely secondary progressions, like eyes glaze over.
And I remember at that time, I mean, I have the midheaven in Capricorn. And at that time, that crazy conjunction of like Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto was right on my midheaven. And at that time, my progressed moon in the 10th house was occurring. So it's a little bit more tied to that. But it's everything, right? Because like, if I hadn't been doing the work that I did for so many years of studying astrology, because it's been the most powerful tool for me for accepting myself and finding my place in the world. Because, I'm a weirdo. I'm very Uranian. I have Uranus conjunct my sun, square my moon,
That'll do it.
square my Mars. So, like I'm a weirdo, and I love that. But I didn't
Yeah.
always love it because I grew up in a country where that wasn't appreciated at that time. Now it's
Yeah.
totally okay. It's now it's like being a weirdo is celebrated. Pluto and
Oh,
Aquarius.
I love that. I do love, and that's actually again a good thing for your moon sign book. You talk about progressed moon, which I think is separate from this conversation, but another amazing tool for understanding, where you're at, where you're going, where you've been. So, okay, we talked about Saturn return. That's the infamous, that's the notorious transit. But your book really emphasizes that every age, every planetary cycle holds a story. What would you say are some maybe underrated or overlooked cycles that people should be paying attention to? Also keeping in mind that, I mean, it's abroad. I think a lot of people listening to this podcast are like Gen Z up to elder millennial, like me. Like I think I'm the oldest millennial there is. Like because I was born the day Pluto moved into Scorpio, basically. So yeah, like what are some of the more like underrated or like cycles that you just wish people would know about or to look into?
Well, there are many, but if I would choose a few of them, it really depends on your chart. Like, what is the planet that I guess you could frame that as weakness, but that's not really where I'm coming from. Like, which is the planet which is the archetype that is unique to you that
Mm,
you need to work with in order to evolve, right? For me, for
mm,
example, that's Mars, because my Mars is fiery, right? So, for example, something that really worked for me was paying attention to my Mars cycle, which is not a
interesting.
huge deal, but it's a 2-year cycle. But when you come from a fiery family, have a fiery Mars, it's very intense in the chart. Like you're going to notice that, every time Mars is squaring my Mars or opposing it or
Mm,
some sort of theme is going to come up. In my case, it's family because I have Mars in Leo, conjunct my moon, conjunct Regulus in the fourth house. So that
mm,
was always really important for me because I was like, all right, tone it down to between, you know, this date and this date, or watch your reactions. Like that has helped me a lot. For other people, I'm sure their moon cycle, just a monthly cycle, if you're a very emotional person, your moon activations are going to be important. But when we're talking about the big cycles, and we know that the faster moving planets function as triggers, right? That's something that I write in the book. But
mm-hmm.
for example, I'm sure people were going to love this. The Jupiter cycle is kind of what you want to get your hands on because every 12 years, you're going to have an awesome year where you get to expand, when you get to grow and feel good
Mm,
about yourself and push forward with your goals because you're
mm,
having this celestial help.
mm-hmm,
Those years are those years to like launch, do launches for your business or try to get a raise or extend your family and
mm,
expand yourself. But in my opinion, something that everybody should know or should be guided through is their midlife crisis,
mm-hmm,
which I'm hearing that you're like around that time, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. No, I definitely want to get into that in a minute 'cause I think this deserves its own like beat, kind of what I was like hoping you would get to because I feel like the astrology of the midlife is so powerful. But I don't want to say it's not as talked about as much, but I don't know if it's talked about as much in in the language that you use, right? Again, empowering, exciting. But I just want to, go back on what you just said. It's really fun. I love learning about how we're always living astrologically, like by the astrological rhythms, whether we realize it or not. So, when I first started learning about Jupiter, Jupiter returns, nodal returns, I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Of course, every 18 and a half years, you go through these like kind of big karmic destiny switch ups and realignments because you think about even our society, like, around 18 is when you kind of leave your family's home for most of us in some way, literally or metaphorically. And I think about these things a lot. It's just like what I do, how my brain works. But lately, I just had Irish twins, so 2 babies within a year. And my sisters are having a bunch of small children, like we're all like toddler moms. And I was cracking up about the Mars return. Like, cause your first Mars return is when you turn like 2. And that's when the terrible twos happen. And kids really discover what they're passionate about, but they discover like anger for the first, like real, like channel, like mine, or like no, or something where you're like, I have a boundary and I want to set it. And it's really helped me understand my nieces and my son. And I'm about to approach my son as a Sun and Mars and Scorpio, and he's about to become turn 2. And I'm like, oh wow, watching my nieces go through this, I'm like, it's such a cool reminder of like how these cycles feel and these transits feel when we come to life. Like, oh, of course we all know that the terrible twos. I'm like, oh yeah, it's not really terrible. It's just they're learning how to express their Mars, especially at the beginning of that, right? And I'm like already can feel it, like in my certain like some younger family members and everything you were talking about. And I think if people look back on their life in those 12-year cycles, you start to connect the dots. So I just love that, and I love how it's happening to us whether we realize it or not. But when we realize it, we can have so much more clarity and context and self-awareness and tools. So this is a good segue into the midlife. So I am there, I'm turning 41. And I think it was like when I turned 38, all of a sudden I was like, wait, am I midlife? Because I still feel 17 in my head. But I was like, oh, I'm midlife. And I started to have that, like, I was getting targeted on Instagram for like midlife, like face creams and midlife. And I was like, oh yeah. But I actually have been very excited for this chapter because working with my teachers and other astrologers, I love a growth moment. I do. Like I'm my Mars is in Sag. I'm always like, let me crack into the next. My Pisces moon is like, great, like let's go. So when I first understood, started understanding what was going on astrologically, and I was like, oh, I'm here. I'm entering these cycles now. I felt more like, okay, I understand my assignment now again, versus just what society tells you. You're midlife, especially as a woman. You're getting older. Womp womp. So can you tell us a little bit, first of all, what are these, what's happening astrologically? And then we can talk a little bit like how you illustrate so beautifully, how to work with them. But first, let people know like what are the planets that are creating this midlife moment?
Yeah, of course. And I'm just coming out of that, actually. I actually wrote this book during my Uranus opposition.
So there you go. I was curious about what was happening in your chart for one or both of these books. So that makes so much sense.
Yes, it's really interesting because, and that it was a challenge with this book because, and now I know why it hadn't been done before.
Yes, I thought that when I saw this, I'm like, this is an endeavor. This is an endeavor to map this very technical things that are very different for everyone into one cohesive, easy to understand, beautiful book. But yes, go on about what was like the first moment that you're like, oh, this is an undertaking.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. So, for example, we're talking about the Mars cycle, well, the moon cycle, which is a month, right? The Venus cycle, which is, you get your Venus return once a year, and Mercury is the same, and Mars is every 2 years. And when you're a toddler at 2, that's your first Mars activation, right? So that's very predictable, right? Every 2 years, and then la 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 la. That's why, for example, everybody gets their Saturn return at 29 years old, because the journey that Saturn takes through the zodiac is predictable. Everybody, regardless of where they nationality, sexual orientation, gender, they will experience that. And you see it all the time, you don't even need to talk about astrology. Just you go to a 29-year-old birthday party and they're going to be like, oh, my life is in flux. This is happening. I'm getting married. And at the same time, I'm changing jobs and I'm moving and all of this stuff. Everybody will notice it. That's predictable. After the Saturn return, there are 2 super duper important astrological activations, which astrologers call the midlife crisis. One of them is the Neptune Square, which is somewhat predictable. It really depends, but it's like a certain amount of age, right? So basically, it depends. It's like in your early 40s. Mm-hmm. That is a very confusing time in your life. Yes. That's why people make some really bad choices, because they don't have guidance around that time. And because it's just like Well, the way that I always talk about it, it's like, well, picture this. I don't know if you've ever been in San Francisco Twin Peaks, but you're driving in your car, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, this crazy fog just turns up and you're like, I can't see anything. What's happening? Where am I going? That's happening with your life. And especially with Neptune, right? Because Neptune, in my opinion, the hardest planet to understand, right?
Which is so meta of it. It's like so literal. You're like, yes, of course, Neptune is so hard to understand and explain. But when you were just talking about that driving and then being that thick, dense fog, I'm like, that's exactly
Well,
it.
that's how that Neptune square feels. But during that time, in reality, because Neptune rules everything you can't touch, right? I mean, if I tell you Mars rules anger, well, that's pretty obvious. That we feel that. Neptune rules dreams, meditation, spirituality, all of that you can only access through closing your eyes and entering that realm of the unseen. That, in my opinion, if you're knowing that, you can start, depending on your level. And I'm not saying like, oh, if you're not spiritual, you're going to have a hard time. I'm not trying to come from that place. But if you know that is kind of like the way to figuring out how to move through the fog, it's not going to be your logical mind that's going to help you during that time. It's going to be your spiritual side.
Yes.
And that's what Neptune is. The thing is, and I think that's changing because of astrology and meditation and all of these beautiful practices that we can use as tools.
Yes.
But because most of us weren't shown that.
Exactly.
We don't know how to move through the fog, right? But it's like, how can you move through life in a state of surrender and flow and inner discovery? That's the Neptune square, right? And in reality, it's being okay with uncertainty to a certain point.
Not always our strong suit as humans.
Not always, yeah. And also, when it's going to end. That's the best part of this all. And not because you're like rushing through to the ending. It's because you're better informed that, for example, if you're having a Neptune square, you're going to have to rely a lot on your community, on your friends, on people who know you better. Because, I mean, we all hear about those stories, right?
Absolutely.
Or like, so-and-so ruined their marriage. It's the classic getting the Corvette.
I was going to say, it's like, again, that's why I love these things, because you understand them without the astrology. Like, we all know the cliche of the guy pulling up in like the cheesy Corvette, dyeing his hair, but whatever. We all know the abrupt, like leaving your life and making like, oh, that's a midlife crisis, is what we call it in our society. And I love that it's like, do not make huge life decisions under this influence without good advice.
For example, exactly. In that section of the book, I said, if you're having your Neptune square, who are the people who that want the best for you? Listen to them.
Oh, yes. I love that, because it's like, yeah, I think people get lost in that fog and those like waters. And I've known people, even before I got into astrology, like, as a child, like stories of like men who left their wives and then regretted it after. And it's like, well, because they had the wrong people in their ear, or the wrong things. So I love that it's not that you can't make decisions or make change, but it's like, first consult who are those people who really have your best interest in mind, and who are your sort of buoys or life rafts as you're kind of going through this soggy, foggy sort of what is up, what is down moment. And I think, speaking of making things a little more clear, I want to get into a question in a moment, but I think you said, the ages of this are 39 to 44. And I like that you said, we all know that these transits end. And I think that is really important. Like you said, not that we're rushing through it, but I think a lot of why I love your book is that when you understand that these things are happening, these astrological activations, as you said, we can stop internalizing them, that something is wrong, or that we did something to like F up our lives, or, like, oh, that's it, my life's ruined now. And versus like, oh, this is a moment. We have a new cosmic assignment to live in deeper alignment, and it's going to be over. It's not my life forever. But if I can really work with this, then maybe I can come out on the better side, as a better me. And I think one thing that's really cool is the stories that you include at the end of every chapter, especially like the Neptune story. You talked about a Neptune sextile story from a divine feminine coach. And I think, to your point, even to me as an astrologer, sometimes Neptune stories, I'm like, I mean, my famous thing is I literally got a tattoo of a trident during a Mercury conjunct Neptune day, and the tattoo came out 5 sizes too big. And I'm like, that's why you don't get tattoos when you're having like a big Neptune moment, because it just makes everything so it's like do it at your own risk. And I thought this was a really, really good story about Neptunian magic and how Neptune transits can work for us. And so I do want to get back to like more midlife astrology activations, but can you just touch upon for a moment of like your journey of including these stories? How did you find a good story for each of these? Because the Neptune one really stood out to me. It's like, that's a really good example of Neptune coming to life versus just reading about it in a book or, on an astrology website. And I was like, that's really, really helpful. So can you talk a little bit about like, how did you go about getting these stories and kind of like having them? What was the inspiration behind that?
Well, I have to say, and because like you said, I'll quote you on that, the evolution of you. I also like to quote some of the people who have inspired my journey and what I do. I have a book here right now and I'm looking at it. It's Stephen Forrest. It's called Changing Sky. And I really like that. He's talking about progressions, technique that I use. And he included a lot of stories of like famous people. Like, for example, when so-and-so had the progress thing happening here, they conquered this, some his stories are a little bit more heroic, that like big names that really spoke to their response to that astrological activation, very particular to them, to those big names. I like that because I feel like a lot of people, and this has been a huge journey for me, being such a nerd and very technical.
Yes, it was very technical to get this information for people. I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, very technical and a total nerd. That was an inspiration, but what came through, and this is going to be a little bit of like a long response, but as I was going through my Uranus opposition, which maybe we should talk about that one, because it's, I think, in my opinion, the most impactful of all of them besides the Neptune square. And we should talk about the Pluto square too, which so basically three.
Those are the three. Those are the three.
Life crisis. When I was going through my Uranus opposition between 2023 and 2024, I was struggling with life because that's what happened. There was a lot of change. And I had liberated myself from working in corporate America fully. And I felt like my life was ending and maybe I made a mistake and all of that. I already wanted, I pitched this book a long time ago, maybe in 2022. That's when I started pitching Written in the Stars. And I had gotten a book deal with another publication, but I didn't really like the terms, so I declined it. And I was like, I'm going to go for it. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to go for it. So it was in a hiatus during a moment. And I had an Akashic Records reading. That's when I was training to be an Akashic channel. And I think that has been the most incredible reading of my life. Not that I had given up on the book, but I was kind of like, trying to figure, I had other fish to fry at the time. So the first thing she said, my teacher's like, do you have like a book? What's going on with that?
I love that.
And I was like, oh, yeah. At that time, the name was Cosmic Rites of Passage. That was the title that I had chosen. And she said, no, this book needs to happen. Like this book, the first thing that my guides that she heard from me, because that's what you're doing in an Akashic reading. It's your soul who's speaking. This book needs to happen, but you need to make it more about you, she said.
There we go.
It has to have your flavor and like your community, and it has to be more basically what she was saying is that it can't be so nerdy, okay? Like come from a place of feelings and sensations and stories and that is a big thing for me because as a Scorpio, I'm pretty private.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the stories came from, also inspired on Stephen Forrest. I was like, well, I'm going to talk about For example, how I came into the world. That's in the Saturn
Mhm.
story because my mom had me during a Saturn Square. That's how I came into the world. Then I share stories of my family, friends. And
Mhm.
so basically, those little stories, even though they're like short and sweetly packaged, there's a lot of work behind them because I had to look at a lot of people's charts.
I was very impressed with that because, I love that your guides came through to tell you that because I think it's interesting, right? It's like that's the thing that is a little bit of that edge for you. You're like, well, I know the book, I know the book I want to write. And they're saying like, okay, you are meant to write this book. And it also is very interesting too with like a Uranus opposition. I always think of Uranus as so much of like our antenna out
Mhm.
to the angelic, Akashic, and whatever alien, what all the other realms of higher information that we get. Like, so to tune into that, to get really drilled down, to work with, in a program like that and attuning that. And then like one of the first things that comes through is like, no, you are meant to write this book, but including these stories to me is so what makes this book alive and so magical, and I think is also something again that wants to like, I always think we want to put something out in the world because it also wants to bring something out in us. And I was very blown away as someone who was also called to write some stories in my book. And it was a challenge, vulnerability from a vulnerability perspective for myself for sure. But also just like, you and I, we have so many stories. We're a collector of stories every day. People are telling us stories and we're like, okay, what is the story that makes sense for this? And how do I tell it in a neat and tidy? These are like insets in your book. They're like, 2 or 3 paragraphs. So how do you take a huge transformational moment, synthesize it into something very digestible? But what I was really blown away was I'm like, oh, this woman is tracking like with this Neptune story, halfway between a Neptune sextile. Like you're getting very into the technical understanding. I'm like, oh, she really did some cosmic detective work of going back on these cycles and seeing what was happening. So I was like, wow, that's really potent. And I'm sure it brought this to life so much for you. But I really appreciate this because I'm excited to gift this book to some of my clients and mentees and family members. And I'm like, and I just know the stories are always what offer, in my opinion, the most medicine. Like,
Oh, 100%.
I'm so grateful that that happened, that the book waited till you got into your Akashic training during your Uranus opposition and got this, because that is what it's the special sauce in this book. I mean, there's a lot of other things we'll talk about, but that was a real special sauce aspect when I was like, flipping through it for the first time.
Yeah, for example, right? Which my Uranus opposition story is there to inspire people because if I hadn't had astrology helping me through my Uranus opposition, I 100% would have thought I was going absolutely insane.
That's funny.
I was like, am I going crazy? No, honey, you're just having your Uranus opposition. It's going to be okay.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah,
So
it
yeah,
was very
that's
ironic.
why I love the astrology guiding us through. Cause I'm like, I see why people just how we have these like meltdowns. 'Cause all of a sudden it's like, my life's going fine. Last I talked to you, like, oh, everything's going fine. She's doing great. But like internally, you're like, am I going crazy? Like there's a lot shifting and happening. So as a reminder, so we just covered Neptune Square. So can you tell people what age range is that for people who are listening? If they're like, am I entering that? Am I close to that?
Yeah, so that range is like 39 to 45, but it'll be, it's not like you're having it the whole time. That's why I created the calculator to help with those activations. You are going to get exact activations, like it says it begins this time, it perfects this time, it repeats another time and the specific dates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to know that you're not going to have it throughout all of those years. It will be different for everybody according to your birth info, right? And the same thing with the Uranus opposition as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
the Uranus opposition is going to be, it's not that you're experiencing it for years throughout. Like you're going to experience it on and off because of, that's why us astrologers are always talking about Uranus retrograde, big news. It's because that means you're going to get a little break, but that you're going to get a reactivation of the story, of that particular story that speaks of your relationship with Uranus, which is
Mm-hmm.
the great liberator. It's my favorite planet, actually.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to liberate yourself from? It's your choice, right? It's a choice. We get choices. And that is, so the Uranus opposition, let me look, because I have the timeline to guide people, but
Yes.
it's around the same time in the early 40s.
Yes. So like that 39 to 45. And that's why this sort of moment of the early 40s feels so monumental, because we have a few things happening at once. And,
Yeah.
while you pull that up, I love that you are, you're Uranian in your energy, and this good reminder of this liberation, right? I always think of this exactly. Uranus is coming to help us free ourselves from something, be of more, our authentic selves in some kind of way. But it's very electric. It's very breakthrough energy. And you're, going through this. And of course, as we're talking, Uranus is about to go retrograde.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for the first time in Gemini. So like, this is also a very interesting, like, just having this conversation is very like, okay, a reminder, like for all of us, like we're really here to break into some new revolutionary ways of thinking, speaking, relating, connecting, looking at things beyond like the duality of Gemini. And I really think that in this book, very Uranian, of how you break down each of these activations we're talking about, it's once very Iranian, and at the other hand, maybe I think you have a Taurus rising. It's very grounded and very visual. So I'm just going to show people on YouTube as we talk about Uranus. There's this like beautiful a wheel that shows the different, your Uranus return, which God bless if we get to live that long till we're 84, we get to live through it. But the Uranus opposition, and then these other like the waxing square, waxing trines when they happen. But you also have, I think, one of my favorite things that I almost want to buy like a poster of. Do you remember like back, I don't know if you had this where you were growing up in school, but they would like have books, and this sometimes they have like an educational poster that came with it. And I feel like this, I just want like a poster of this timeline for my wall, because it's so helpful to understand like all of the different cycles we're going through, long-term planetary cycles by age. It's so helpful with the visual energy of it, where you're like, because again, like you just said, there's certain ages we're going through multiple things at once. It's not just one time thing or one at a time. In astrology, there's a lot happening concurrently. So I was like, why is this book is so Uranus to me? Like, that makes sense now hearing about your chart, because I'm like, in some ways, I've never seen an astrology book like this, but it's also very grounded.
No, thank you for that. And that's not a bad idea to create a poster.
Yeah,
of
like this like big on the wall. I'm like, okay, like as a quick reference guide. Okay, so we're talking about Uranus opposition here, and I know we could like, yeah, I think these three midlife ones are good ones to like drill down on, because I think very helpful for people listening. You've already kind of touched upon it through your own story, but could you give people like the TLDR, like the quick little synopsis of what this might feel like, and maybe how it differs from the Neptune square?
Yeah. So the Uranus opposition is a time when your inner rebel knocks in, right? It's like, knock, knock, who that? It's like your inner rebel. You're having your rebel moment, your rebel era.
Your rebel era.
And that is going to manifest differently for everybody. And it will have a lot to do with how free, how authentic you have lived up until then. And this is not a punishment, because I don't believe in that. But like I said in that book, if you are already a rebel like me, if you're a little bit weird already, you're going to get weirder and louder and more powerful. And you're not going to feel so like bad about it, because you're already have danced to the rhythm of your own drum. So you're going to have a party. It's going to be wild and exciting. Also intense. I'm not saying that Uranus is intense because it's the planet of electricity. It's the planet that breaks us free from conditioning, whether that's social or on personal conditioning, because in reality, we don't have anybody to blame about our actions, right? But if you have lived your life up until then, until your early 40s, ignoring that inner rebel, especially during the sextile before and all of that, well, you're going to go and buy a Corvette. So it really depends on how true to yourself you've lived up until now. If you've been, for example, staying in a relationship
Yes.
or at a job that hasn't brought you joy for a long time, well, Uranus is going to awaken you to the fact that that needs to finish, right?
Yes.
So it really depends on our own Uranian story, but that there will be some sort of liberation, you can count on it.
Liberation for sure. And I know so many of my clients or family members who have left the stagnant, out of alignment jobs and definitely marriages around that time. Like there's such a freeing. But I've also watched people, who are already living in their freak flag waving, most beautifully, weirdo embracing, rebellious self, just go to an even more beautiful level of feeling embodied in that and sharing that. So I also love, again, like your book really talks about practical strategies for dealing with all of these activations, but also like the opportunity in it all. Because I think that, anytime that we hear stuff happening in astrology, I feel like people's first instinct is to like clench their butthole. They're just like, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? And that leads me into the third and final, like midlife defining moment, which is probably the scariest one when people hear about it, because good old Pluto's involved. But can you tell us about the Pluto Square?
Yeah. So, and I think I forgot to say that when I was saying that a challenge to create this timeline was the fact that Pluto has an irregular orbit.
Yes. Yes.
Which is why it got demoted in the first place a few years ago.
It's so Pluto.
By Aries.
It's so Pluto.
Which is another subject. Aries, these other archetype of feminine energy. What's the reason why Pluto got demoted? But that's another subject. Pluto has an irregular orbit. So basically, it's going to be very different according to your generation when you're going to get both the sextile and the square. I am from the Pluto in Libra generation. So basically, Pluto doesn't spend the same amount of time in each sign. Its orbit is very irregular. So for example, I am from the Pluto in Libra generation. So I experienced my Pluto square way before than, for example, the babies with Pluto in Aquarius are going to experience.
Yes.
That was really what inspired the timeline, because like the Pluto sextile, which is like a really important time of transformation, you can experience between 23 and 45.
That's a big range.
That's like a really big range. And then the Pluto square, which is like midlife, that's a little bit more closed off, is between 35 and 50, depending on what generation you are. And for that, the way that I've seen it and I've experienced it is a lot of people from my generation were doubting their career path at that time. Because at the end of the day, right, Pluto is about personal power.
Yeah.
And when you're not stepping on to that, you're going to have people having power over you and all sorts of things, right? Because you're not fully into your personal power. And a lot of that is like what we do with our lives, right? Am I being my full powerful self? Is it still the right way to focus my attention?
Yes.
That's what I've seen. I don't know if that's your experience, but it's very interesting. And I wanted this book to be able to help every single person from any generation.
That's why I love this book. It's like, give this to literally anyone in your life, like a teenager or, an octogenarian in your life, and they will get something out of this, whether it's to understand their like present moment, where they're headed, or like you said, this beautiful gift of looking back and being like, oh, that's what was happening. And, we've talked about this, but why I love this book, but why I totally commend how big of an undertaking this is. You do the outer planets, you even do the faster moving planets, and we said things with irregular orbits, and also just things that are a little bit more technical. Like these are very technical things, but written in like a coffee table book presentation where you're like, okay, like anyone can kind of lift this, pick it up and look at it. The artwork you made in it, the timeline, the stories, really ground it and make it like juicy and not as like dry as some, more of like I keep using the word technical, but that's the word that comes to mind, technical astrology books. But the other thing that I love that you did, and you did this for your moon sign book too, was have this generator online. And I love, we have our decoder. I love a chart generator. I love something that means you don't have to, be using astro gold or some things. I think where we lose people a lot with astrology is like the jargon. It's like learning a new language and the technicalities of it. It's just, you just see people become so overwhelmed. I think it's such a barrier to entry. Whereas I think astrology is like, it has been the most life-changing tool that I've really come across. So what you have a written in your stars calculator. And this was so impactful because I think that, whether it's someone trying to find, you have on here, you could do it by Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and your nodes, your north node, to figure out when you're going to have like these different, whether it's a return or a square as it relates to the book. To me, that is game over. That is so helpful because now people can really see when these things are occurring, really read about it in the book, get the strategies, get the tools. And, for funsies, I did it and I did Pluto. And it's like as an astrologer, you kind of know these things, but truthfully, I don't know if it's the Virgo in me that's always like, let me help everyone else, but like not take my own medicine. Sometimes I'm not even tracking my chart to the way it should, like totally. But certain things happen in life and I will check my chart after and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's should have looked at my chart ahead of time for that one. I'm always like cracking up. I'm like, whoa, yeah, that makes sense. And I've had some of the craziest years of my life, like 2023, 2024. I was looking this up and I was like, oh, my Pluto Square, the influence, it says starts January 22nd, 2023 and ends February 10th of this year. And I was like, oh my God, it's also, I have a Pisces moon, Saturn moving into Pisces right after, it correlates to the story in March of 2023. And I knew I had my Pluto Square around that time, but something about seeing those exact dates, I was like, oh my God, that was literally the date of that was the date I got pregnant with my first son, like within probably a day of that. And I just say that because Pluto's in my 5th house.
Oh,
so, and part of my like giving away power thing was I called off my wedding when I was in my late 20s and like I was in my power around it. But one of the things that was in the back of my mind was just this sort of like irrational fear of like, did I maybe leave that conventional path for a more aligned, authentic path? But as, a woman in society, it was like, oh, those were like my fertile years. And I really wanted to fall in love with the right person, have my own business, tap into my purpose, have adventures, do a lot of healing on myself before I had children. And there was a little bit of that in the back of my mind. Plus, I also met an astrologer who was not a good one and told me I was never going to have children because I had Pluto and Saturn in my 5th house. It's a story for a different day. But like, it was really a journey of going, that's why I like started even studying astrology more deeply. Because I'm like, my intuition says that feels off. But I'm also like scared as hell from hearing that. And also all this time, not even knowing if I wanted to be a mother, but just knowing that I wanted it to be more of my choice. So that was really wild. And then the day it ended, February 10th, was actually the day I lost my mom. But it was a long journey and she was an Aquarius and truly like it was a very long journey. She was sick for a long time, but it was actually one of the most beautiful end of life experiences. And we got to really close out some really intense karmic cycles in my family. And me and my sisters essentially like rescued her from an unhealthy relationship, got to take care of her, got to just like, oh, I could cry. It was like a really empowering experience. So when I saw the, and she's an Aquarius, this is Pluto and Aquarius. And I was like, I saw those dates and I was just like, well, even me who just talks about this and yaps about this day in, day out, I stopped in my tracks looking at that calculator on your website. So it is such a cool and powerful tool and could not be easier to use. So like, thank you for creating that because it really helps this become a lot more digestible and applicable, right? So I just had to share that personal story because I was blown away pulling that up. I was like, I knew the range, but I never pulled up the exact dates because life was lifing really hard.
Yeah.
Life was lifing. And I was just like, whoa.
Yes. I mean, Pluto is no joke.
No.
But Pluto is very deep. Just like you said, it's a life-changing moment with your mother that obviously involves a Plutonian archetype, the experience. But at the end of the day, how enriching it is, because with Pluto, you have to get your hands dirty. You're not going to get that gold it's not Jupiter, right?
Mm-mm.
With Jupiter, like Pluto says, when you're having your Pluto square in particular, it's just like, honey, do you want to get to the gold that's below you, that you have below the surface?
100%.
You got to get your hands dirty, you
I
know?
love that. I love it. And the other date was like, there was like the exact date, the influence date, and there was a date in between. And the date in between was the day my second son was born, because I had two babies within essentially 13 months. So I went from being like, oh, I'm ever going to get pregnant, to being like an Irish twin mother, and seeing those dates. And I've been reflecting on this a lot over the past like year, of just like really feeling grateful for the Pluto journey, of like what it cracked open within me and what it made me face within myself, but facing it head on and looking at it. And also like the transformational journey of really like sort of befriending Pluto for the past few years, and instead of like avoiding all of that, like whatever was stirring up in me, I just was like, okay, like big girl pants on, let's just deal with this. And what it brought open for me on the other side of it, I was looking at photos and videos for some project I had to do over the past week. And I was like, wow, I look different from before my Pluto square. But I look better energetically, better now. I'm like, I just feel so much more here. So I just wanted to share that too, if anyone's going into the Pluto square, and all of these transits, especially, I'm going to say, I only can speak from my own experience as a woman. These transits, I see why traditional patriarchal society has made us feel like they were bad things. And we know this. This is like, I'm not the first person to share this, but like when you work with this energy, you come out so much more liberated, so much more powerful, so much more unfuckwithable, and like knowing yourself. Then like, oh, I get why they've like made women feel like they shouldn't be excited for these, because I'm like, with the right information, the right, people guiding me through understanding the astrology. I was looking at these photos of myself from before this time, and I was like, oh, I'm so cute and I'm doing a great job. But I can just feel in my aura, just, a little bit more uncertainty, a little bit more lack of presence or power, whatever you want to call it. So it's another reason that I just like love that you speak about these, navigating these life cycles with like feeling really held but empowered during them, with like these real life tools and strategies.
Thank you so much. Thank you for noticing all the work and all the love that I put in it to inspire people. Because, with the North Node in Virgo, that is my calling in life, to inspire, to feel good about themselves and the possibility of living life in their own terms, and not what we're being told or offered in saggy face creams and things like that on social media. Like you were saying.
Yes. I love that.
And like, for example, one last thing that I would like to say, or I'm here for any questions you want, by the way, but when you were talking about age, which is a Saturn thing, every 7 years you're going to notice, oh, I look different, like you were saying, right? One of my guinea pigs for the stories was my father-in-law, because he was one of the only people that I know that experienced their Uranus return. And if you read the story there about him, it's a beautiful story of how he found love right around his Uranus return, which is impossible, according to society.
Right.
I'm never going to find the one, and all of these, conditioning that, and especially women. But for him, being a serial entrepreneur and kind of a workaholic, and I don't think he'd be upset if he heard me say that, because we talked about it. It was during his Uranus return when, to be with his new wife, he had to give up his business. It would be the only way that at that age you think he'd be retired, right? No. No. That's what makes him happy, to work and be productive. And that's fine. We can't judge that, right? That's his own thing. But in order to be with her, he had to sell his company. That's what Uranus represented for him, like liberating himself from his company, which was a very intense time in his life. He was, at around 84. So it was a very, very busy, very intense, highly activated Uranian, change and needing to do things and needing to move and unroot. He had to unroot from his 20-year apartment at 84 years old to go live with his beautiful new wife.
Wow.
So in a way, he got liberated from himself.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Such a beautiful story. And I love that you, again, those stories really bring this planetary magic to life and help people see the invitation and the opportunity in all of these moments. And just thank you for creating this book to help us understand, our map, our astral DNA, like you said, and just it's such a beautiful roadmap for everyone because everyone's going through these moments, like you said, whatever your background is, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, where you live in the world, whether you believe in astrology or not, it's happening to you. So thank you for that final note. And where can people find you if they want to work with you? I know you, in addition to I think you still do consultations, you also make incredible art based off of the birth chart. Do you still do that? Okay.
Yeah.
As I didn't check with you first, but I remember that is one of my favorite fun facts about you. But yeah, there's a lot of different things that you offer. So can you tell people, who might want to work with you, how they can do that and where they can find you?
Yes, of course. So my website is naramon.com, and there you can find both of my books. You can see my art, and you can read about my journey, and some of my writing is linked there. And I have now that I'm liberated, and now that I spend my Uranus opposition liberating myself from a lot of fears and from a lot of blockages, mental blockages that I had around my business, for example, I have big plans for Naramon. So, from classes and workshops to meditations to all of these things that came to me during that time that can be helpful. The same way that I navigated that, I want to share that with people. So it's not just astrology, but I think I'm going to be doing other practices that I have relied on along my journey. I want to share that with people as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, everyone, yes, go check out our website. Go buy this book, Written in Your Stars, wherever books are sold. It's also just lovely and beautiful. It makes so much sense, even North Node and Virgo, because the whole book, I was like, yeah, the Virgo the organization, the digestible, empowering nature of it speaks to that so beautifully. So thank you so much for coming on today, Narayana, and thank you to everyone for listening. I hope this conversation just activated, inspired you, or just helped you feel a little bit less crazy.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Maddie. I appreciate you.
Do you love getting your Cosmic RX for the week here and want more? Make sure to sign up for our premium subscription so you can get exclusive access to bonus podcast episodes, all of my astrology info for the month ahead, and live new and full moon calls to help you manifest your dream life with an intentional international community of other cosmic baddies. Sign up through our link in show notes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to know more about Cosmic RX, head on over to thecosmicrx.com. And if you really love this show, I'd love it if you left a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. I super love hearing from you and reading your reviews. All right, you cosmic baddie, tune in next week. And until then, remember, love yourself fully, work your magic, and take no shit.